Hotel. Lafayette, Lafayette. Hotel. What it do? Uh-oh. Like the show, share the show, man. We're gonna get it in for a minute. I ain't gonna spend too much time. Oh man. Ignorance is bliss, people. Ignorance is bliss. That's right. West Africa versus everybody. Oh man. Hey man, did y'all check out the two gulas? Put a one in the chat, man, if you checked out the two gulas. Found that story quite interesting. Quite interesting. The one before that I found quite interesting. So let's get this thing cracking, man. I don't expect a bunch of people to be here. It's kind of in the evening type of deal. Let me turn my camera on real quick. All right, I'm gonna shoot from the hip with this book. Let me bring it down a little bit so you can see the author. History of the World by Hugh Thomas. I'm gonna shoot from the hip from this book. Dr. Benworth, Mother of Western Civilization. I'm gonna shoot from the hip on this book, Man, God, Civilization, John G. Jackson. I'm gonna shoot from this book, History of Africa. Some scholastic work right here. Yeah, boy. That's where I'm coming from. All right, so I showed y'all my sources. I'm gonna go with source number one, which is Hugh Thomas, A History of the World. And let's see what Hugh Thomas has to say about the history of the world. Chapter 1, by the way. He says, the birth of the world. Genealogy has its satisfactions, but how disconcerting to those who worship ancestors to find that in the direct male line, men derive from an ascending order, a monkey, a newt, a sea lily, and a bacterium. I'm gonna repeat that. I see we got people coming in, so I'm gonna repeat that. He says, genealogy has its satisfactions, but how disconcerting to those who worship ancestors to find that in the direct male line, men derive from an ascending order, a monkey, a newt, a sea lily, and a bacterium. The legend that the Earl of Northumbria in Shakespeare's Macbeth was descended from a fairy bear seems, once the principles of evolution are accepted, only mildly misleading. He says, life, however, is far from the first ingredient to take into account. The solar system of which the Earth is a part is now known to be a galaxy of 100 billion stars in an archipelago or of galaxies perhaps comparable to 20 billion years as a result of an explosion which propelled all the galaxies away from each other. The nearest galaxy to our own is held to be 2 million light years away. Our galaxy and the Earth apparently came into being almost simultaneously. Following the contraction by rotation of clouds of dust between 4 and 5 billion BC, the sun was concentrated core at the center of this rotation. The planets formed around pieces of debris. No one suspected until recently that the Earth and the universe were anything like as old as this. In the 17th century, the Anglo-Irish theologian James Ussher, Archbishop of Armagh, reflected a widely held attitude when he spoke of the world as having been created in 4004 BC. The French naturalist Georges Buffon thought that the world might be at least 70,000 years old. In 1755, the philosopher Kant speculated that the figure might be 1,000,000 or even millions of years old. But the timetable, now regarded as approximately correct, was only discovered in 1935 by an inspired astronomer, Edwin Hubble of Missouri. The considered study of the skies, however, began long ago in Babylon, where much data were gathered together and analyzed by means of relatively advanced mathematics. The Earth's crust wrinkled for a long time, creating mountains and seas, the latter caused by the further condensation of vapors. The sea and the land where it was now believed once absolute divide into entirely separate dimensions in a planet which thus had one ocean and one continent, but the latter known to geologists as Pangaea, split into something like present continents about 2,000 million BC. Much movement of land, however, continued afterwards. The creation of the Channel, which divides England from Europe, and the Bering Straits, which cut off Asia from America, were, for example, the product of later commotions. India was separated by sea from Northern Asia for a time before 45 million BC, as was till about 2 million BC, north from South America. Africa was once, it seems, as close to South America as was North America. The Mediterranean became a desert about 6 million BC and became a stretch of water again 1,000,000 years later, while the Black Sea, too, was once the arm of the great ocean. The early years of Earth belong to chemists, not to historians. For a historian, it is enough to know that a metallic core 3,750 miles wide came into being within the Earth, mostly liquid iron and nickel, though solid in the center. Between that core and the Earth's crust, a mantle of iron and magnesium 1,875 miles deep took shape. The crust, which is of diverse composition, varies between 12 to 30 miles in depth on land and only 4 miles under sea. Before the coming of anything recognizable by the name of life, many fundamental matters had already been decided. The Earth began to rotate clockwise, creating westerly winds. Some latitudes were already cold, some hot. The tilt of the Earth's axis created seasons. Mountain ranges already affected climate, and seasons had begun to be clearly differentiated. Life in the form of bacteria and microorganisms apparently began between 3.2 and 3.4 billion BC. The first planets descended of bacteria grew in seas or on the edges. Their immediate descendants were worms, which came into being around 100 million BC, shellfish, jawless fish, scorpions, and vertebrate fish, which were probably living by 450 million BC. The worms were the first thing living thing were the first living things, unlike their predecessor plants, had to seek food from outside themselves. Plants can make for themselves the chemical elements which they need in order to survive. From the vertebrate fish descended reptiles, large and small, which came into being about 350 million BC. Some of these were dinosaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, the ancestors of turtles, lizards, and snakes. Other extinct reptiles known as theropods, resembling the duck-billed platypus, could walk on 2 feet and had teeth. Whether they had fur, warm blood, and laid eggs is obscure. From them, nevertheless, the mammals descended at first being small and insect eating, weighing less than 20 pounds, and seeming comparable to lemurs, bush babies, shrews, or squirrels. For many millions of years, these ancestors of all the more successful animals of the world today live side by side with the dinosaurs who dominated the world for 150 million years. The eclipse of the dinosaurs about 65 million BC, probably due to an unidentified climate change which destroyed all large animals. Mammals perhaps survived since. Apparently, they were all under 20 pounds in weight. By that time, mammals had multiplied their species. Primates, the direct ancestors of men and monkeys, had appeared. So had insects and birds, while most flowering plants had assumed something like their present shape. Let me stop right there real quick. Now that I got everybody's attention. In the third paragraph, I want to say this again. He says, the early years of Earth belong to chemists, not to historians. Nah, I didn't watch Khalil's live. I have no idea what his bill was about, Niger Valley Civilization. But yeah, you can feel free to let me know what it was about, because I don't know. Now, let me continue on real quick, because I'm about to get to the next source. About 30 million BC, an animal was born which is believed to be a common ancestor of man and modern ape. These two species apparently diverged between then and about 5 million BC, though the data is a matter of dispute. Some anthropologists of distinction believe that men were already different from apes by 20 million BC. Others put the date nearly 4 million BC. At all events, between 10 and 5 million BC, the ancestors of men were still usually living in trees. They were still basically herbivores and do not seem to have been carnivores much before 4 million BC. Then, or perhaps about 3 million BC, ancestors of men usual motion and to carry things in their arms. By then, too, man was beginning to be regularly carnivores, a differentiation from other primates perhaps caused by a shortage of nuts, berries, or fruit. That perhaps was the main reason for the descent from the trees, though our closest relative among the other primates is also primarily a dweller on the ground, the African chimpanzee. And though the chimpanzee can use objects such as stones with great agility and effectiveness, they were shortly other differentiations from other primates, such as the more subtle possibilities of man's use of his hands and his greater fertility. There are minor differences in sexual behavior between humans and the apes, and while chimpanzees and gorillas mate only during the female's ovulation, women, like female gibbons, can mate at any time. Gibbons, like most humans, live customarily in monogamous families, while male chimpanzees and gorillas seek to establish harems of females, which they try to dominate until overthrown by a younger rival. All the apes are close to men in blood. An almost political sense of operation can be discerned in monkeys. Though unlike men, and indeed birds, they do not as a rule cooperate with each other in the pursuit of food. Chimpanzees seem, though, to share food on the rare occasions when they eat meat. On the whole, however, apes eat vegetables or fruits, and do so on the spot. Some regard the change of habits of food gathering from individual scavenging to cooperative search for game as a determining one in human evolution from apes. Now, the main distinctive characteristic of human beings, however, derives from the size of their brains. They may have followed man's change to an erect posture. The human brain needs a large skull and also a large cortex. Yet plainly, it is not the size of man's brain alone which has been responsible for his place in the world. Porpoises and whales have larger ones. Even so, the brains of men's ancestors doubled in size between about 3 million and 1.5 million BC, from 450 to 900 cubic centimeters. Meantime, these bipeds were making stone tools and hunting animals by 2.5 million BC. And by 1.5 million BC, at least, the stone tools had begun to be flanked on both sides, perhaps to cut up elephants and mammoths, which could hardly have been eaten without some such implement. All right, now all these dates may be a little ungenerous, if that is the correct word. It may be, for instance, the upright walking evolved earlier than 3 to 4 million BC and nearer 10 million. Subsequently, that is after the beginning of both hunting and the making of stone tools, man's brain developed further to its present approximate size of 1,400 cubic centimeters, and the history of Homo sapiens proper begins, or indeed of what anthropologists now call Homo sapiens sapien. The coming of this being seems only to have occurred about 40,000 BC. The main subdivision, subspecies, or races of men probably made crossings at different times of the threshold from a more brutal to a more sapient state. Where the line was first crossed and by whom is unknown. Probably it happened in several continents at the same time. Perhaps the decisive change causing the brain to grow further was made possible because the earlier tools already in use enabled, as we would now put it, a better standard of living. The differences between Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapiens were considerable. For example, the first, who was in the past often known as the Neanderthal man, from the fossilized remains found in the Neander Valley in Germany in 1856, had a brain the size of modern man, but slightly different shape. Most of the tools of Homo sapiens which survived derived from flakes of flint. Homo sapiens sapien had less tough skull than his predecessor. His tools were slender and sometimes already shaped for ritual uses. Harpoons, needles, ales, complicated weapons, and long voyages all follow fast, or at least fast in comparison with what had gone before. In comparison, Homo sapiens pure and simple seemed closer to his predecessor, to whom the Homo sapien erectus is now given. The Homo erectus remains of which were found in the Java in 1890 and subsequently in Africa and China had a thicker skull than Homo sapiens had. His frontal lobes were not well developed and his brain was small. His jaws and teeth were larger than modern man's. Even so, he used a stone axe. He even had fire, about 450,000 BC in both Hungary and China. It was first used for keeping warm, giving light, and sharpening sticks at the ends to ward off enemies. The absence of early traces of fires, hot countries such as Africa, suggests that the first use of it was the need for warmth. Homo erectus used caves for shelter. Some of the late versions of his primates, such as those whose skulls have been found as Swanscombe in Kent, dating from 250,000 BC, have been thought of as virtually Homo sapiens. It seems possible that the change occasioned by the coming to Homo sapiens sapien about 40,000 BC may have been inspired by language. No doubt men were not silent before. Apes communicated with one another, but without language. Even simple tools must have needed speech for them to be made well. But the use of clear speech must have constituted a decisive change, making possible a whole range of activities previously unthought of. Among primates without language, there are no religions, no politics, no works of art. Speech is usually the main element of cohesion among human beings, even among the few the primitive ones that have survived. But its origins are a mystery. 30 families of languages have been identified as existing in historic times. They embrace 2,500 main languages and dialects, but many languages avoid classification. When the Europeans discovered Australia, 500 tribes were found there, each with 500 to 600 members, and each one with their own language of several thousand words. Europe must once have been the same. In South Africa, the differences were even greater. When the Europeans arrived, some tribes there spoke different languages among the men and women. Probably many people talked to each other effectively by whistling languages, such as the Silbo, which survives on the Canary Islands of Gomera and ends in the Pyrenees and in a slightly different manner at Oaxaca in Mexico. Some think with Carlton Kuhn that the social requirements of a group of hunters made speech necessary. Possibly the first languages were without parts of speech, with the phrases and thoughts expressed by a single word. Was speech perhaps a single invention by a single tribe, and did others imitate it perfectly? Over 20,000 years, two sister languages may be expected to deviate and to lose all semblance of relationship. But if all language derives from a single mother tongue, the original separation would have been many tens of thousands of years before 20,000 BC. There's probably more than one breed of men discovered speech independently. I'm gonna stop right there with that guy. That was from, again, if you just joined, A History of the World by Hugh Thomas. I'll show y'all the book again. I stopped on page 9. Go to the book. There go Hugh Thomas on the back. All right. Now that was Hugh Thomas's view of the beginning of the world. He went through a bunch of stuff in that, those first few pages in the early history of man. He talked about the universe. He talked about the forming of the earth. He talked about man's earliest ancestors, and he walked it back, he went from different phases of different things, leading back to the number one cause of man being bacterium. Science kind of backs that up a little bit. We can get a lot of lessons out of that part. But what I want to transcend into now is the next book that I showed you earlier. And then I'll get into our great ancestors. This one, again, the history of Africa, we're going to look at a different perspective from some great esteemed scholars. Now, in this work, it's 536 pages. We have Baba John Henry Clarke is in this book twice, Basil Davidson, Philip Curtin. We also have Adu Bohin. You should be very familiar with some of the names that I actually mentioned. And then there's some other people that actually worked as consultants and editors on this particular book as well. All right. This is the horizon of the history of Africa and the emergence of African history. In the early part of this is Philip D. Curtin going in on the emergence of African history. I'm not going to get too far into that because I know where he's going to go in this, and I don't want to lose y'all with the topic that we're on. So I'm going to skip up a little bit, and I'm going to get to the beginnings, right? So the African beginnings. For centuries, man's imagination has been captured by attempts, usually fanciful, to establish the exact locality of the place of origin of the human race, the paradise of ancient mythology. Scientific research of the last few decades carried out by archaeologists, paleontologists, and workers in allied disciplines is making it increasingly likely that the legendary birthplace was somewhere on the African continent, probably south of the Sahara. Today in Africa is the home of many human culture traditions, ranging from simply hunting societies to elaborate urban civilizations, a result of interactions over many millennia and the selective use of the potentialities of the different environments. Indeed, the single most powerful influence of the lives of men as of other creatures is the environment in which they live. Temperature, rainfall, its distribution throughout the year, and short climate, together with the kind of plant communities, the associated animal life, the availability of surface water sources, or economical important minerals, not only shape the tenure of man's daily life, but have been significant influences on his biological evolution. Now, animals and plants are adapted to living in a particular habitat through natural selection and competition. I'll say it again. Animals and plants are adapted to living in a particular habitat through natural selection and competition. Some creatures have succeeded in adapting to several different ecological niches, but by reason of man's culture and technology, only he and some life forms dependent upon him have been able to make adjustments that permit him to live anywhere he wants to in the world. Man's emancipation from environmental controls has been a comparatively gradual process, though one of steadily quickening tempo for 9/10 or so of human history. However, the rate of biological and cultural progress was extremely slow, almost imperceptible. Only in the past few thousand years has man developed the abilities that make possible today's sophisticated urban civilizations. Nonetheless, man remains an integral part, though by far the most influential part, of the many different ecosystems in which he lives. And he now has it in his power to destroy or to conserve or improve them. Moreover, from the beginning, man's relationship with his environment was one in which he always had the freedom to choose how he could make best use of natural resources and which of them he should select. It is the possession of rational intellect and of culture, the ability to manufacture artifacts and the skill to use them, that gives man the opportunity to exploit resources offered by different habitats. And this finds expression in the patterns of behavior that control the lives of every human community. I'm gonna stop right there. Let me see where we at in the chat, because I'm pretty sure I lost a couple folk. Let me see what Naja said. Some dude is in the chat talking about human life started in America. Oh, okay. Where's the science behind it? So I'm gonna skip a couple of pages, and I don't want to go through the things that we already know and what the Amish Squad teaches as far as the emergence of man in Africa. Africa is the only continent where we find all 5 stages of the hominid species, evidence of all 5 stages. Okay, that's really a big deal. So we shouldn't have to argue with anyone about that. So I want to see what the Africans say about Africa and the history. So I want to go to one of the oldest emerging man. All right. All right. So check this out. On page 42 of the book that I just told you. And we're going to deal with years of research in East Africa have enabled Dr. Louis Leakey to produce the following reconstruction of the life of a caveman. Nah, I ain't going to do y'all like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the art of the Bushman. Nope, I ain't going to give you that either. I'm going to give you one even better. Nah, I'm going to hold that. Let me go to John G. Jackson. Let's see what he said about early man. The Early Ages of the World by John G. Jackson. Man, God, and Civilization. Do this in order. Man is a child of his earth. And if we understand his origins and evolution, we must learn something about the history of the planet upon which he dwells. Any theory as to how the world began must of necessity contain a large element of speculation, since none of us was present to witness that important event. As we all know, the Earth is one of a number of planets spiraling around the sun as it floats through space. Now, the sun is a star, and it is similar to many other stars which twinkle like jewels set in the dome of the night sky. The other stars are also blazing balls of fire, but they are so far away that they appear only to be little points of light. With the unaided eye, only a few thousand stars are visible, but the telescope and camera reveal them in such vast numbers that attempting to count them would be a sheer waste of time. The stars or the cosmos are as numerous as all the grains of sand on all the seashores of the world. It's page 3 now. As these stars wander through space, many of them travel in groups, but the majority of them just journey along as solitary vagabonds. The cosmos is so vast that a star is like a ship on an empty sea. Imagine stars as ships on a great ocean, so far apart that one ship will rarely come within a million miles of another. With millions of stars wandering blindly through space for millions of years, it seems probable that occasionally two stars might come close to each other, or even accurately meet in a head-on collision. Cosmologists have promulgated theories of the origin of the world. The late Sir James Jeans thought that billions of years ago, as our sun roamed aimlessly through space, it was approached by a larger wandering star, and that the gravitational pull of the passing star was so powerful as to raise gigantic tides of the sun. The gravitational stress was so great that the fragments of the sun were ejected into space, and after a roving star passed on, the detached fragments continued to circulate around the sun. In the time it cooled off and became planets, and among them was this old world of ours. This theory, though plausible, has in recent years been superseded by another promulgated by Professor Raymond Littleton. And astronomers have found huge stars scattered throughout space that sometimes become unstable and explode like huge hydrogen bombs. These stars are called supernovas. And Littleton opines that one of these celestial giants was a binary partner of the sun about 5 billion years ago. Now, this star was destroyed by a supernova explosion, and some of the debris of the great blow-up was captured by the sun. Eventually, this matter differentiated into several planets of the solar system, of which our own world is one. For details of this hypothesis, the reader is referred to page 148 and to 148, pages 170 to 174. For thousands of years after separating from the sun, the Earth was flaming sphere of gas, but the extreme cold of interstellar space gradually reduced it to a state of liquidity. Then came the birth of the moon while the Earth was still in the fluid conditions and rotating more rapidly than at present. A large blob developed, somewhat like the knob of a lemon, and this prototurbulence became detached and rounded itself into our neighbor satellite, the moon. After more thousands of years of cooling, the Earth began to wear a solid crust. The heavier elements sank into the interior, while the lighter ones floated to the surface. In those days, the Earth was a white-hot sphere surrounded by a thick mantle of red-hot gases, hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, and carbon dioxide. As the cooling process proceeded, oxygen and hydrogen combined, forming water, which hovered over the hot crust of the Earth as a blanket of steam. With this passage of much time, the steam condensed into water and settled down over the world as a boiling ocean. There was not at that time much land in the world, just a few ridges poking up through the permeable sea, and the water was fresh, for all the salt in the sea was later washed out of the land. All right, but let's not travel too fast. Hold on, Vassal. Let's not travel too fast from whence did the land come. The original solid crust on the Earth was probably as smooth as the surface of a billiard balls. All you got to do is just put the name in there, so people can look it up for themselves. Had it remained that way, the primordial ocean would have covered the entire surface of the globe. In other words, there would have been no dry land, but as heavy elements of the interior of the earth lost heat through volcanic activity, they contracted and thus caused the outer crust to fall in toward the interior and to crumble up like the skin of a baked apple. And the ridges of depression thus formed were the first mountains and valleys. The battle between land and sea began as soon as the world cooled enough to hold an ocean. The struggle has been a long one, but the land steadily gained on the water. Life arose in the sea, but the greatest episodes in the drama of life took place on the land. The problem of the origin of life is one of the great interests. The world was in existence hundreds of million years before it became a suitable abode for living things. For life can occur only within a very restricted zone of temperatures. There can be no life in the stars since they are too hot. And in outer space, the intense cold likewise makes life impossible. Thus, life must have originated when the earth developed a temperature that was neither too hot nor too cold, for the life cannot survive where it is either roasted or frozen. Of the 100 odd elements of which the stuff of the universe is composed, only a few show any affinity for life. Living matter consists mainly of atoms, which possesses the property of forming large molecules. Atoms of hydrogen, for instance, may combine to form molecules of hydrogen, or atoms of oxygen may form molecules of oxygen or ozone, and atoms of hydrogen and oxygen may combine to form molecules of water and hydrogen peroxide. But none of these compounds have more than 4 atoms per molecule, and the nitrogen compounds have behaved in a similar way. But if to the atoms of hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen we add carbon, a most extraordinary thing happens. The atoms of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon combine to form molecules consisting of hundreds or even thousands of atoms. Carbon is of prime importance in the chemistry of life. So life first arose in the warm primeval ocean, beginning with evolution of chemicals capable of assimilating carbon. Of the early history of life, we have no record, since the earliest living things had neither bones nor shells, and hence life no traces in the rocks. At the end of the Precambrian era, animal life had not yet reached the level of insect or the fish. The next geological age, the Paleozoic era, is divided into 6 periods. Now, the earliest subdivision of the Paleozoic era is known as the Cambrian period. The 5 other periods in order of succession were the Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, the Carboniferous, and the Permian. The dominant animal type of the Cambrian period was the trilobite, a flat animal with a broad head shaped like a shovel and with a tree-lobed shell on its back. It possessed numerous legs with which it crawled and swam, and had large compound eyes. A forerunner of the shrimp and of the crab, the trilobite reached its climax in the Ordovician period and then gradually declined. The teeming life of the Cambrian seas, besides the trilobites, there were the shellfish, sponges, jellyfish, and corals continued to develop in the Ordovician period. It was a time of great volcanic activity, and the Ordovician seas brought forth the earliest vertebrates. These vertebrates were strange-looking creatures, half fish and half anthropod, and are known as osteocoderms. They look like primitive armor-plated fish, though they lack articulate jaws. I'm gonna stop right there because we're gonna talk about some fish for a long time. And then I got the book, The Inner Fish, upstairs, which I would need to actually continue to follow up this one. So I'm gonna stop right there with John G. Jackson. Nah, Yahweh Shai ain't got nothing to do with do it, man. I'm gonna deal with Dr. Ben now, Mother's Western Civilization. I'm not gonna read that much into his because I know I'm kind of boring everybody just listening. Let me get to chapter 1. Let me get to skip through chapter 1. He's talking about the Semites. Craziness. Chapter 2, prehistoric Homo sapiens or ancient African man. That's how he deal with it. Page 31. In the beginning, God created man from the earth and called him Adam, etc. Is this the manner in which the Hebrew and all of the other religious philosophies based upon this myth start? This, of course, will bring man back to the Tigris and Euphrates valleys of Asia. But man, the most ancient of man, has been found to have existed in the continent of Al-Kubalan hundreds of thousands of years before the birth or creation of the Hebrews, Adam. This then places man in Africa before he was anywhere else on the planet. This too is the most important reasons why Africans and their ancestors must be denied their indigenous heritage and history of the areas of both sides of the Niles and all of North Africa, or all other places in that greatest landmass called Africa by the Greeks and the Romans. It is with all these cardinal points in mind that this chapter begins. For in these earliest of human or human-like fossils are the end to the race's premise of the superiority of the Caucasian race over all other races, which is pseudoscience, which ones have become accustomed to hearing within the last 200 or more years in the United States of America and Europe and all other areas of European and European American colonial, neo-colonial, and or political spheres or influence. Now, African historians and others within the varied disciplines of education sat idly by while European and European American counterparts reached into Africa and laid claim to the ancient fossils being unearthed in the heart of the continent. The Africans named Akubalan among many other names, which people still searching for that name. It is in the vein that this chapter also presents the introduction of many other African fossils which otherwise would not have been available to average student or reader. It is also in the same realm that the anthropolitical terminologies normally applied are given, yet the general language used is not in the sense the type written solely for a strict academic audience that would be interested in the scientific technology of the subjects presented. For these reasons and many others, the author of this volume desires to reach a more broader audience as well as his students in order to bring the average reader just what lies behind the identification of the indigenous Africans and that which tries to deny them this heritage. This while being seen in the mere fact that it is only a last resort that the earliest of the human and European Americans began their excavations in Africa for the purpose of finding the missing link between man and he appears today and as he was at the time, at the beginning of time. Since the inquiry concentrates more so in the center of Akubalan, this is a greater reason to deny the Africans their indigenous birthright. Thus, one sees the Jeffrey Judos, Wienerts, Sir Harry H. Johnstons, and others like them that much better in retrospect, understanding why they must go to the extreme they have already gone in their feeble attempt to remove every trace of Africans as the first of the original man to have inhabited the true Garden of Eden, the Olduvai Gorge in Tanganyika in Africa. The fossils submitted for presentation are only a few of the hundreds found all over the continent of Africa. All right. Shit on purpose, man. All right, I'm back. Okay, so Dr. Ben argues on page 40 about an ape-like ancestor, not an ape. He says the intermediary link between modern man and his much more ancient ancestors. I don't know if many people have actually read this book. I read this book 3 years ago, 4 maybe. I haven't revisited it in a while. He spends most of a lot of stuff early in the book, talking about evolution, the different bones, where they were found, the locations, and so forth. So I'm gonna stop right there. I'm gonna come back to Hugh Thomas real quick, and then I'm gonna rap with y'all for a minute. All right. I'm gonna go back to page 9 where I left up with Hugh Thomas. We left off at evolution, of course, seems to continue. The teeth and the jaws of human beings became smaller as cooking rid them and so of the gastronomic troubles of early man. There were alterations in glands, brain, and reproductive organs during the age of the hunters. The movement of the Earth's crust also continues. India is pushing against Asia, so is Italy against Northern Europe. These things cause tremors, such as those which brought the great Chinese earthquakes in Tangshan in 1976. The universe is also presumably continuing to expand. Remember, if you know anything about the Earth is rotating in 2 different ways, depending on where you are calculating these rotations in the crust. And also because they're working against each other, you're also seeing the Earth retract and contract. If you think I'm making it up, you can just look it up for yourself and you can deal with that. Now, in chapter 2 of Hugh Thomas' book, he talks about man as a hunter. Okay, so I'm going to only read a paragraph and then I'm going to jump to another one because there's a reason. Pay attention to dates, locations, and typical names. Most of man's time on Earth as a recognizable human being has been passed as a hunter. This hunting, which lasted until at least about 10,000 BC, is held to have been based on the stone hand axe, which gave to the era its Greek name, Paleolithic or Old Stone, a word invented along with Neolithic or New, that is polished stone, by Christian Thomsen, a Danish pioneer archaeologist in 1836. Those who lived in the age of hunting would probably have been surprised to have been thought of as a people of Stone Age, for many of their weapons as well as their houses, boats, and bridges were made of wood, which however could not survive so easily as stone. The Yale lances found at Clacton, England, or Larigan, Saxony, perhaps suggest the nature of the age of hunters as much as do the stone axe heads in museums all over the world. Well, may ours be called a wooden century, wrote a pioneer of America in the 19th century AD, pointing to the wooden houses, bridges, fuels, pins instead of nails, and latches which mark his days, thereby making to a continuity rarely interrupted before the 20th century among pioneering people. Still, the stone axe made possible the cutting and shaping of wood, and other stone implements enabled the scraping of skins for an early version of clothes and cutting of meat for better food. As for the most great innovations, no one can decide whether the stone implements were invented in several places independently or whether there was an original center from which the idea radiated. Common sense suggests a diversity of invention. Further, the surviving stone axes show not only a definite pattern of development and improvement, but also that in some countries, at least early hunters went to great lengths to get good stone. Going back to my African history book. And I'm gonna talk about hunters in modern Africa. Oh, hold on, I want to deal with the cave dwellings. No, I don't want to do that. We're talking about stone. All right, so hunters. All right, so when the first Europeans arrived in South Africa in the 15th century, they found groups of hunters who had not yet entered the Iron Age. Indeed, some hunters having retreated into the Kalahari under Bantu and European pressure have even today continued to perpetuate ancient mods, barely altered by outside influences. The following excerpt by Monica Wilson, professor of social anthropology at the University of Cape Town, describes the present economy and social structure of Southern Africa's hunters and collectors, notably the Kong, the San, and the Gwi peoples. It is based in part on reports of colonists and travelers up through the 1800s, but it also draws the contemporary scholarship such as L. Marshall's studies of the Kong Bushmen. The hunters and collectors described by the early travelers and settlers inhabited the mountains and the seashore. They had no domestic animals except the dog and lived off game, of which there were enormous herds in Southern Africa, wild roots and berries commonly called velcos, caterpillars and termites, and locusts, wild honey and fish. Recent studies in the Kalahari show that even in the desert, vegetable foods play a major part in the diet of hunters. And this is likely to have been the case when they occupied better watered country. A digging stick tipped with the bone and weighted with a board stone and a skin cloak, which also served as a bag, were the women's equipment among the mountain people, and these are still used in the desert, though tipped and weighted. In the desert, ostrich eggshells used for storing water are a housekeeper's essential utensil. Hunting was so important that wild hives were marked as private property, and a thief who stole from one might be killed by the owner. The hunters of the mountains fished in the rivers with the harpoons made of bone and trapped eels when the opportunity offered. And the standlopers, hunted and collectors on the shore lived off shellfish and other fish caught on lines, and in the fish guards, which are still visible along the Cape Coast. All the hunters used bows and poison arrows. The effective range was small, 25 yards among the Gwi, and hunters crept up on the herds sometimes, disguising themselves in buckskins or ostrich feathers. Then they followed the wounded animal until the poison took effect. They were highly skilled in tracing the spoor. They dug traps for large game and built stone or brushwood fences or posts or cairns, the height of the hunter and surmounted by feathers to form converging lanes through which game was driven. This suggests cooperation between a considerable number of men. The hunters also burnt the grass during the winter to attract game to the fresh pasture and to make them more visible, and to encourage the growth of spring bulbs. This firing of the grass was a common cause of friction with the herders, who likewise burnt for fresh pasture, but who needed to preserve some of the area's long grass to maintain their cattle. The hunters were fair weather men because their bows were not serviceable in the rain. The gut spring snapped, and they always lay up in the caves during rain in the mountains, and where they had the choice selected drier rather than wetter country. Now the hunt supplied not only food but clothing, which was made of skins, and the furs and the feathers, which were and still are traded to other people for iron and tobacco. Even in the early day, utensils of ostrich eggshells and tortoise carapace were hunters' trophies. The hunters lived and still live in bands, each independent of the next, and their characteristics is isolation. In the Queenstown district in the 19th century, every band used the cave as its headquarters And in each of these, there was a painting which was sacred and from which a band took its name. One painted was a python, another was Springbok, another of Eland, and so forth. The desert bands on which we have evidence have no headquarters, but each has a name which continues through time and each moves within a defined area. All the hunting groups have and had territories over which there was prior rights and recognized. Mrs. Marshall's statement fits very closely with that of Kolb, who reported in 1707 that the Hottentots of every Creole and nation have liberty of hunting throughout all the Hottentot countries. However, neither isolation nor the recognized of territory precluded movement over 100 miles or perhaps much further. Sand living in the Drakeson Mountains painted boats which could only have been seen near the coast, 100 miles away, and mounds of shells from shellfish have been found on middens 50 miles inland. Hunting expeditions typically lure men far afield in their traditional histories of Africa. It is most often the hunter who explores and settles in a new territory. The San was surely no exception. Interaction with only a small number of people is not to be confused with confinements to a limited area. Now, among the Kong, marriage between neighboring bands is approved, and the movement of families of parents and children from one band to another occurs, but only within the area recognized in some commonly unity. Now, this includes 36 or 37 bands and 1,000 persons. The diversity in language among the hunters, even neighboring bands sometimes not understanding one another, is surely a reflection of long isolation. So to sum up today, we talked about chemistry. The reason we talked about chemistry because the beginning of the world is for the chemists. After that emerged the historian. Remember, that's what your boy said in his book. Let me give y'all the quote one more time. I think I even put this on Facebook once. He says, the early years of the earth belong to the chemists, not to historians. For a historian, it is enough to know that a metallic core, blah, blah, blah. I ain't got to go back into that. Do you agree with that statement? In the early history of the earth, it belongs to the chemist, not the historian. That's an actual fact, because you're talking about the evolution of the earth, the evolution of bacteria, the creation of a lot of things that transpired over time, the retracting and the reacting emergence of the actual Earth's core, and all the things that preceded that point. Then came man. And when we say man, we're not talking about man as we see man today. We're talking about the earliest hominids, and going from the earliest hominids with other creatures and things of that nature that preceded that. You see that period of these animals come and go and so on and so forth to transcend. So far as, people argue over the fact of us having this lineage back to a fish, the inner fish, which is upstairs. So we dealt with John G. Jackson, Man, God of Civilization, Dr. Benz, mother of, what was it called? Shoot. Mother of Western Civilization. We dealt with the history of Africa by some esteemed scholars. And those were the four sources that I actually choose to actually talk about this evening. There was a lot of chatter going on as far as the beginning of humans. Let's see. There was something that I wanted to catch up real quick. Man, I wasn't expecting nobody to actually show up, We didn't go after the earlier show. Plus, I've been talking all day. Again, man, if you tune into this live stream, I actually did a 5 minute video. Do anybody got 5 minutes? It's about the gula, the two gulas. Check that out. Check that out. Listen to this. This is a poem also included in the repertoire of the Gabon Pygmies. It's called Death Rites. It implies belief in the ascendance of the soul. It says the animal runs, it passes, it dies, and it is the great cold. It is the great cold of the nights, it is the dark. The bird flies, it passes, it dies, and it is the great cold. It is the great cold of the night, it is the dark. The fish flees, it passes, it dies, and it is the great cold. It is the great cold of the night, it is dark. Man eats and sleeps, he dies, and it is the great cold. It is the great cold of the night, it is the dark. There is light in the sky, the eyes are extinguished, the stars shine, the cold is below, the light is on high. The man has passed, the shade has vanished, the prisoner is free. Kavoom, kavoom, come in, answer to our call. That's a poem by the Pygmies in the Gabon. Yep. But yeah, man, that video from earlier, the two gulas, like that video, share that video. Share the other one before that too, you know. The revolt against God. Make sure y'all share that one. So yeah, man, I really don't know what happened earlier. I just wanted to come on here and just kind of read up on, do a little literature review. I like doing literature reviews. I think it's prevalent to this particular conversation that we deal with literature reviews because some of us don't know how to review literature, but this is just an example of what the beginning of some research may happen. In the coming future, though, I may go silent for a little while. I want to write an article for volume 2 of the Pan-African Journal, Killmonger's Corner. Ben's taking emails right now. You can email Ben your work and to see if you can get it inside of the journal. We had a lot of people to say that they didn't get their work in the first journal where you didn't submit it. So he started it. He's giving you time to actually get it submitted and see what you can do. I believe that I'm going to write another article for that. I don't have I have a topic in mind, but I'm gonna reserve it because I may go in a different direction. I think this coming Sunday next week is the great debate for the debate over vaccinations. That's going to take place in Harlem. Man, if you haven't donated $5, $10, $100, $1,000, whatever you can afford to donate, please donate to the GoFundMe. Support the Amara Squad. Support them. They need your support, your financial support. They got to get there. They got to represent. They putting their reputations on the line. They're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff, and I think it's imperative that we actually support them. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can support them. So support the squad, support all the scholarship, the books, the classes. Support those things, man. They are not cheap. They are not cheap, man. And people take time away from their family to give us this stuff, and we don't take advantage of it or appreciate it. I don't think people really appreciate it like a John Henry Clark until after, that's Black people habits. We don't appreciate anything until it's gone, right? gonna miss me when I'm gone, right? I die tomorrow, you gonna be trying to big up me. Nah, I ain't there, yeah. I don't think nobody will do that for me, but it just goes to show that what we're dealing with, you know. But give me a second though. I wanna play something for everybody. First let me get it downloaded. So hold on, let me get it downloaded. Don't trip on it. If you're still in here, boy, it look like we done lost some people. I stopped talking about something and ran away. But if you're still here though, man, look, I'm finna let me download this hymn and then I'm gonna play it. Yeah, let me do this. It's my show. You do this. It's gonna be crazy, yo. Hold up. Hold up. All right, here we go.
I'm so excited for them.
Sean is on here? All right. Hey, Sean, this is what I want you to do for me, bro. I want you to, I don't know if you're home by your computer where you got your slides, because I would really appreciate you going through the whole Gerald Massey and some of the things that these people say. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I got it up.
And my whole thing is, there's a lot of translations of Egyptian texts that people use. You know, Shaka Amos made a mistake. Jabari's wife, which I'm willing to learn Mejanetta from his wife. One of the issues with Jabari is stubborn and he has to be right. So nobody else is right. I'm going to give a quick example. In the Divine Prospect debate that he had, right? He said to Divine Prospect told him that there's different theories that's on about where the Israelites originate from, right? He said it was only 2, I think. And Divine said it was 4. I didn't come out in public and say, oh, he was right, Jabari was wrong. Because, of course, I'm Team Jabari because we're on the also consciousness side as far as consciousness, and the Bible is like the enemy. So I didn't come out and correct him, but I'm saying it now. There's even more than 4 theories on the table. But Jabari was ignorant to them. So in his ignorance, he couldn't have said, you know what, brother, Divine Prospect, you are correct. But when you have an ego, everybody's jealous of you. Everybody wants to be you. What does Jabari have that I don't have? I don't recruit people to some religious organization. I don't pray to a mystery God. What am I jealous over? The same things that we argue with Christians about is the same thing that he is doing. So he is perfect for the Christian community because they believe in the same thing. It makes no sense. When I said on the ear Friday night that he supports that it's not the right man's religion, because how could it be the right man's religion when it comes from Egypt? It makes no sense. And then we're coming around too and say, oh, it's a copycat of Egypt. So how is it the right man's religion if it's a copycat of Egypt, dummy? It's craziness. Nobody's jealous of these people. These people just want to promote their shrines and get membership. And I'm not leaving out as master teacher Baba Heru. I'm going to go in tomorrow. The name of the show is going to be Brother Garfield versus Jabari, and I'll issue a warning to Baba Heru. That's going to be the name of the show tomorrow. Because Baba Heru said some shit that we gave him a pass on that we should never give him a pass on. I was my elder, and that's cool if my mom and dad taught me to respect my elders. where he basically said, fuck West Africa in that debate with Jabari and Divine. This is why I didn't go to West Africa, because I was skipped over and I go to my ancient ancestors in Egypt. Your ancient ancestors ain't from Egypt, buddy. You perpetrate a fraud. If you want to follow Egyptian systems, so-called Egyptian, because Egypt is not the right word, if you want to follow Kemetic systems, family, you have all the right to, because guess what? Those Kemetic systems were influenced by the Saharan desert Africans who went into the region of Kemet. People need to understand that Kemet people didn't just born, or we were born in Kemet. No! There are people that come from, just like America today. America is made up of quote-unquote immigrants. There's no Native Americans except for the people who are Native Indians to this region. Everybody else who controls America has nothing to do with the indigenous people. It's white people, it's African descendants, it's Asians, it's all types of different people that live here. That's how Egypt was. The indigenous people were Africans, though. Let's not forget that. The indigenous people were Africans. So what I am going to tell everybody that's watching, all this Egyptomania has made us, instead of being African-centered people, we become Egyptian Christians. And that's the problem. You believe the same way that they believe. I mean, I'm not holding my tongue. I'm not jealous of nobody. Why should I be jealous of anybody? What does Jabari have that I don't have? Think about it for a second. We're talking about popularity. I'm not worried about popularity. I'm not trying to recruit people to anything. If you want to be a part of the Dagger Squad, be part of the research group, go ahead. I'm not promising you no heavenly pastures. You're not going to go to heaven. I'm not promising you none of that. I'm not promising you some afterlife spirit and all that. I'm not doing none of that. All I'm doing, for 6 years, I've been holding my tongue about this Egyptomania craziness. And I could talk about it because I used to be one of them. I used to be one of them that said Heru is Jesus. Heru had 12 disciples. And this man went into debate and repeated the same pseudo information. And then on Friday, he gonna mention Achara S. Achara S is one of the proponents of this Heru and the 12 disciples. That foolishness. Everybody's born December 25th. And da 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 da. Stop. Show me where Heru was born December 25th. Somebody tell me when Heru was born December 25th. I really love to see that. Let me tell y'all something, family. We need a methodology. We need a methodology. Yeah, Reggie feels like me, and so does Shaka Amos. But Shaka Amos gonna bring me into some war that ain't got nothing to do with me. He should have never called my name. He should have left me out of it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to do this. I'm going to wait until, because he kept saying, well, I'm doing a presentation, you might as well wait. Now, he really doesn't want to debate Garfield. And Brother Jabari is listening. And I'm going to say this, brother. The only reason why the Christians want to debate you because they know they're going to win. They know your information is pseudo. When the Amira Squad, we try to correct you, you said you had a source. And we know deep down inside you never had a source. That the person you heard it from was probably Baba Heru or probably one of the elders and so forth. But you decided to appeal to authority scholarship. We don't do that around here. There's a methodology that I have to follow. So when people say someone borrows something, an idea, there's a methodology to use. You have to do cross-comparison research. You have to follow the historical method. You have to, first of all, you got to ask a question. Right, Sean? Did Christianity or Judaism borrow elements of Egyptian culture? So now you got to ask yourself, I can't say no because I'll be dishonest. Of course, elements were borrowed because the elements that were borrowed, and people don't know this, but Genesis 1-11 was written way after the Genesis 12 to 50. It was written way after. So Genesis 1-11 is what's called the primeval history. That was written way after 2nd century BC. So the things in Genesis 12 to 50 is written before Genesis 1-11. So that's where your understanding is wrong off the bat. So when we talk about Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the purpose of the Bible from a Greek perspective is to show that Shem, Ham, and Japheth is where all humans come from. That's what the Bible is telling us. Jacob comes from this line. Abraham comes from this line. So your job now is to try to figure out why they're saying it. Now, there's no Egyptian element in none of that. Now, is there Egyptian elements with a Memphite theology in Genesis 1-11? Hey, yes, there is. Yes, there is. I know where Egyptian stuff is all throughout the Bible. I've never said there's no Egyptian elements. But the main storylines have nothing to do with Egypt. It's not an Egyptian copycat religion. It don't follow the stuff Egypt follow. And that's the problem. The Bible is an anti-African religious systems book. It's against divination. It's against that. That's one of the main elements throughout all they call it. Just because they circumcised don't mean that they copied us, because it was written that the people in that region in the Levant got their circumcision from the Ethiopians and the Egyptians. So I'm going to say this, man. Tune in tomorrow morning. I'm going to go full blast. And anybody who's an Egyptomaniac and you support that everything comes from Egypt, I'm willing to have a discussion and we could get into it. But I'm not playing no more games. The gloves are off. I don't want to be nobody's friend. I don't want no more friends. I got enough friends already. I don't want no more friends. So everybody say, oh,
I'm so excited for them.
Oh man. Hold on. It's more to it though, y'all. This was the best. Let me get to the good stuff. That's right, from West Africa. No more appeal to authority. It's a wrap. No more people making up stuff, getting away with it. It's a wrap. None of that. None of that detrimental information is prevalent to our success. It's a wrap. But hold on, I got to get y'all the rest of this. Hold on. Let me see where he stopped at.
Dr. Clark used Jeremiah.
Oh, let me go back.
And then Haskell 45,
That was 9 minutes.
You don't mention Achara S. Achara S is one of the most and divine. This is why I don't go to West Africa, because I will skip over and I go to my ancient ancestors in Egypt. Your ancient ancestors ain't from Egypt, buddy. You perpetrate a fraud. If you want to follow Egyptian systems, so-called Egyptian, because Egypt is not the right word, if you want to follow Kemetic systems, family, you have all right to, because guess what? Those Kemetic systems were influenced by the Saharan desert Africans who went into the region of Kemet. People need to understand that Kemet people didn't just born, or we were born in Kemet. No! There are people that come from, just like America today. America is made up of quote-unquote immigrants. There's no Native Americans except for the people who are Native Indians to this region. Everybody else who controls America has nothing to do with the indigenous people. It's white people, it's African descendants, it's Asians, it's all types of different people that live here. That's how Egypt was. The indigenous people were Africans, though. Let's not forget that. The indigenous people were Africans. So what I am going to tell everybody that's watching, all this Egyptomania has made us, instead of being African-centered people, we become Egyptian Christians. And that's the problem. You believe the same way that they believe. I mean, I'm not holding my tongue. I'm not jealous of nobody. Why should I be jealous of anybody? What does Jabari have that I don't have? Think about it for a second. We're talking about popularity. I'm not worried about popularity. I'm not trying to recruit people to anything. If you want to be a part of the Dagger Squad, to be part of the research group, go ahead. I'm not promising you no heavenly pastures. You're not going to go to heaven. I'm not promising you none of that. I'm not promising you some afterlife spirit and all that. I'm not doing none of that. All I'm doing, for 6 years, I've been holding my tongue about this Egyptomania craziness. And I could talk about it because I used to be one of them. I used to be one of them that said Heru is Jesus. Heru had 12 disciples. And this man went into debate and repeated the same pseudo information. And then on Friday, he going to mention Achara S. Achara S is one of the proponents of this Heru and the 12 disciples, that foolishness. Everybody's born December 25th and da-da-da-da. Stop. Show me where Heru was born December 25th. Somebody tell me when Heru was born December 25th. I really love to see that. Let me tell y'all something, family. We need a methodology. We need a methodology. Yeah, Reggie feels like me, and so does Shaka Amos. Well, Shaka Amos gonna bring me into some war that ain't got nothing to do with me. He should have never called my name. He should have left me out of it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to wait until, because you know he kept saying, well, I'm doing a presentation, you might as well wait. Now, he really doesn't want to debate Garfield. And Brother Jabari is listening. And I'm going to say this, brother. The only reason why the Christians want to debate you because they know they're going to win. They know your information is pseudo. When the Amira squad, we try to correct you, you said you had a source. And we know deep down inside you never had a source. That the person you heard it from was probably Baba Heru or probably one of the elders and so forth. But you decided to appeal to authority scholarship. We don't do that around here. There's a methodology that I have to follow. So when people say someone borrows something, an idea, there's a methodology to use. You have to do cross-comparison research. You have to follow the historical method. You have to, first of all, you got to ask a question. Right, Sean? Did Christianity or Judaism borrow elements of Egyptian culture? So now, you got to ask yourself, I can't say no because I'll be dishonest. Of course, elements were borrowed because the elements that were borrowed, and people don't know this, but Genesis 1-11 was written way after the Genesis 12 to 50. It was written way after. So Genesis 1-11 is what's called the primeval history. That was written way after 2nd century BC. So the things in Genesis 12 to 50 is written before Genesis 1-11. So that's where your understanding is wrong off the bat. So when we talk about Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the purpose of the Bible from a Greek perspective is to show that Shem, Ham, and Japheth is where all humans come from. That's what the Bible is telling us. Jacob comes from this line. Abraham comes from this line. So your job now is to try to figure out why they're saying it. Now, there's no Egyptian element in none of that. Now, is there Egyptian elements with the Memphite theology in Genesis 1-11? Hey, yes, there is. Yes, there is. I know where Egyptian stuff is all throughout the Bible. I've never said there's no Egyptian elements. But the main storylines have nothing to do with Egypt. It's not an Egyptian copycat religion. It don't follow the stuff Egypt followed. And that's the problem. The Bible is an anti-African religious systems book. It's against divination. It's against that. That's one of the main elements throughout what they call it. Just because they circumcised don't mean that they copied us, because it was written that the people in that region in the Levant got their circumcision from the Ethiopians and the Egyptians. So I'm going to say this, man. Tune in tomorrow morning. I'm going to go full blast. And anybody who's an Egyptomaniac and you support that everything comes from Egypt, I'm willing to have a discussion and we could get into it. But I'm not playing no more games. The gloves are off. I don't want to be nobody's friend. I don't want no more friends. I got enough friends already. I don't want no more friends. So everybody say, oh, and none Shevek, you know what? I don't want to block you. I don't want to do anything. I want your opinion. So why don't you come on and let's have this conversation? Come on, get the link and come on. It don't make no sense you be a sideline scholar and say, Garfield, you're wrong. Come and show me why I'm wrong. Why is Garfield wrong? It don't make no sense to be a sideline. And then Haskell 45, you no longer allowed to come on my chat. You can't come on my, don't even call it no more. You're disallowed.
Here it comes.
He's gonna say Garfield.
Pay attention,
agent, right? This dude, right? He's gonna say unwittingly. I'm an agent because I support vaccines, and you took vaccines, nigga. Get the hell out of here, man. All you anti-vaxxers, I don't even want to tell in my chat because you're useless to society. If you can't give me a solution to the people in Samoa right now who are dying because of the measles, get the hell out of my chat. And you don't like your people, or you don't want to protect black people. You're an agent. You are not for black people, and it's not about a disagreement or argument. Show me a solution to vaccines. If you don't, shut the fuck up. Period. Well, Garfield, you know that there's a possibility they could use a vaccine. Well, you know what? White people are dying more. White people get vaccinated more than black people. Because right now there's a town in Florida that they have all these anti-vaxxers are telling the people don't take vaccine. And guess what? All these things they get vaccine for is prevalent in all those neighborhoods. And they're still telling people not to get the vaccines. So why are these people getting these diseases when they're not vaccinated? We need to cut the bullshit out. Some of y'all niggas they need to just chop y'all heads off at the door. Ridiculous, serve no purpose. I don't trust the white man. You don't trust the white man? Well, tell me why you don't trust him. Oh, syphilis? Okay, so why you want to live in America then? Because that means the food that he supervises, he could poison it and put some germ in there that only affects melanated people like y'all like to talk about. Why are you in America then? You're just a damn rumorist and a conspiracy theorist that serves no purpose. None. But spreading lies to the black community. Serve no goddamn purpose. All of them, man, they don't serve no purpose. You know, the vaccine, the government might do this while the kids are dying of measles. Can somebody in the audience right now tell me a solution to the people in Samoa that's dying right now? Niggas is dying. Niggas is dying right now in Samoa. You tell the Israelites tonight to the front of the tribe of God or something. They dying. What you gonna do about it? What you gonna do about it?
He going off.
Sick of these dudes, man. Serve no purpose. Oh, you're an agent. Don't come in my chat. If you feel I'm an unwittingly agent, Haskell 45, don't come in my chat no more. Leave me alone. Go to another chat. Because you, sir, anybody who's an anti-vaccinator is against black people surviving. We invented the motherfucker, and y'all are running from it. We invented vaccines. So when the Africans used to do this Africa without the white man's interference, it was good then, right? So why when they learn from us and teach, they take everything from us? We invent everything. We invent the traffic light. We invent peanut butter. We invent everything that we do. Blacks had something to do with it. Almost everything. Well, not everything. Well, a lot of stuff. Not going to be no romanticist. Come on. Give me a solution. Give me a solution right now. Now, Haskell 45 trying to suck up. Oh, preach, Garfield, they dying. I want you to give me a solution. Give me a solution. Give me a solution, family. Let's get it. Give me a solution right now. Forget about why you're anti-vaxxer. Give me a solution to the people in Samoa dying from the measles right now. What should they have done, black people? Since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, all of them. Bring them come. I need a solution. So if you ain't got no goddamn solution, shut the hell up. The Amara squad is putting their reputation on the line to beat up these fools. And they're fools. And all of them sell some sort of remedy and is in it for money. All of them. All of them are vaccinated. Every single single one of them is vaccinated and that's another dagger too. Ask all of them if they're vaccinated. Oh, the vaccines did this. I need a solution. So if you ain't got no goddamn solution, they take everything from us. We invent everything. We invent the traffic light. We invent peanut butter. We invent everything that we do. Blacks had something to do with it. Almost everything. Well, not everything. Well, a lot of stuff. Not gonna be no romanticist. Come on. Give me a solution. Give me a solution right now. Now Haskell 45 trying to suck up. Oh, preach, girlfriend, they dying. I want you to give me a solution. Give me a solution. Give me a solution, family. Let's get it. Give me a solution right now. Forget about why you are anti-vaxxer. Give me a solution to the people in Samoa dying from the measles right now. What should they have done, black people? Since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Nabi Jurali, all of them. Bring them come.
Yo, this was the best. Hold on. All right, one more time. Oh, 24. One more time.
Give me a solution. Give me a solution, family. Let's get it. Give me a solution right now. Forget about why you are anti-vaxxer. Give me a solution to the people in Samoa dying from the measles right now. What should they have done, black people? Since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Nabi Jurali, all of them. Bring them come. I need a solution. So if you ain't got no goddamn solution, shut the hell up. I need a solution. I need a solution. Come on. Give me a solution. Give me a solution right now. Now Haskell 45 trying to suck up. Oh, preach, girlfriend, they dying. I want you to give me a solution. Give me a solution. Give me a solution, family. Let's get it. Give me a solution right now. Forget about why you are anti-vaxxer. Give me a solution to the people in Samoa dying from the measles right now. What should they have done, black people? Since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Nabi Jurali, all of them. Bring them come. I need a solution. So if you ain't got no goddamn solution, shut the hell up. The Amiral squad is putting their reputation on the line to beat up these fools. Because they're fools. And all of them sell some sort of remedy and is in it for money. All of them. All of them are vaccinated. Every single one of them is vaccinated and that's another dagger too. Ask all of them if they're vaccinated. Oh, the vaccines did this. And you know what's messed up? You might catch a disease 40 years from now and somebody could say, you know what? You know why you have that disease? Because of the vaccines. Without proof. The vaccines did that. It could do stuff to us later on. All of us are vaccinated. What has the vaccine done to you? You screwed all these women without condoms. You caught AIDS, but it's the vaccine's fault. Yo, I got AIDS, man. The vaccine they gave me 40 years ago is the reason. So it's been living in your body. And after you reach a certain age group, you catch AIDS because of the vaccine. Yeah, and black people will believe it. Black people believe it. Come on. Where is your solution? I don't even care if 20 people watching me no more. I don't care about those numbers. I don't monetize my channel. I don't care. I don't care who want to unsubscribe. I don't care. I'm done. This community is so pseudo, it's ridiculous. Jamal was never a top scholar. Never. We just allowed Sarnetta to call him Mayweather and boots it up. But we know he was no top scholar. We knew that. Give me a solution. Give me a solution, family. Let's get it. Give me a solution right now. Forget about why you're anti-vaxxer. Give me a solution to the people in Samoa dying from the measles right now. What should they have done, black people? Since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, all of them. Bring them come. I need a solution. So if you ain't got no goddamn solution, shut the hell up. The Amara squad is putting there. Since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, all of them. Bring them come. I need a solution. So if you ain't got, since the vaccines is bad for you, what is the solution? Give me a solution right now. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, all of them. Bring them come.
Y'all are tripping, yo. Y'all are tripping. Listen to me. This fool said Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, bring them come. Yo, they pissed the man off today. I ain't gonna hold y'all up, man. I just wanted to laugh. I had somebody chop the video up, the first part, and he forgot the most important piece was the next 5 minutes. But you know, I'm gonna take what I got. You know what I mean? I need a solution. I need a solution. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, bring them come. Oh, man. But yeah, man, you know, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. You know what I'm saying? This was one of those impromptu bills. Just doing a little review of some research that I was doing earlier, and I just wanted to go live and like just rediscuss the things that I actually was overlooking and dealing with. You know what I mean? I was just comparing a couple of sources together and seeing how they lined up as far as the history of man and the world and so on and so forth. I do have other sources to correlate to that, but what I decided to do was to choose the History of African book. I went outside of my realm into Hugh Thomas, which I used to get some slave information with the Portuguese, the early history of the influence of the Portuguese and their coming in West Africa. He's really good. He has some really good primary and secondary sources in that book, Slave Trade, and he did a an all right job here. Still some work we got to cipher through with the history of the world in his perspective. And you know, I wanted to use Dr. Ben John Jackson. They also speak on evolution and things of that nature. I also gave you guys 2 different creation stories from West Africa. You know, that one is 7 minutes long. One is 7 minutes long, and the other one is less than 5 minutes long that I dropped earlier today. At the end of this particular show, I'm going to do it in the morning. I got another one that I want to drop, an upload. And before I head out, I'm going to drop that upload on you guys. And, you know, see how y'all like that. So, man, tune into the dude show tomorrow, man. Let's see if he snap again. You know, see how that all transpires. And I just want to say Shimon Motep. Y'all have a good evening.